Friday evening in Dayton, Ohio. Jaron Walker, 38 years old, African-American, employed as a warehouse manager at a regional logistics hub, was driving his 3 children home after baseball practice. His 13-year-old son, Marcus, sat beside him, while 9-year-old Tiana and 6-year-old Isaiah were in the back seat. At a red light, Jaron's attention was drawn to an alley near the intersection. 2 uniformed officers were striking a black teenager with batons. The boy was already restrained with handcuffs, kneeling on the ground, and audibly shouting, "Please stop!" He did not resist or attempt to flee, yet the blows continued. Jaron pulled his vehicle over, instructed his children to lock the doors, and stepped out. He activated the camera on his phone and began recording from several meters away. He raised his voice and told the officers to stop. One of the officers, later identified as Daniel Bradley, moved toward him quickly and demanded that Jaron delete the recording. Jaron responded that he was within his rights to film what was happening in a public space. The second officer, Mark Ellison, circled closer. When Jaron again refused to delete the recording, Bradley grabbed at his arm while Ellison pushed him from behind. Jaron fell sideways toward the curb, still clutching the phone. His children cried out from inside the car, calling for him to get up. According to multiple bystanders, Jaron did not attempt to fight back. He was pinned to the pavement, restrained, and struck in the ribs and shoulders. Witnesses later stated that Bradley took the phone and placed it in his pocket. Jaron hit his head on the curb during the struggle, after which his movements slowed and his speech became slurred. Some bystanders began filming with their own devices and shouted for someone to call an ambulance. Eventually, Jaron lost consciousness. His children could be heard sobbing inside the car. When paramedics arrived, they treated him for a head injury and transported him to Miami Valley Hospital. An unexplained detail emerged at this moment. The teenager who had been beaten in the alley was gone. Emergency personnel who briefly checked the area did not locate him. One of the officers told medics that the boy had been released, but no citation or name was recorded, and no one saw him leave. Witnesses insisted that only minutes earlier the boy had been handcuffed and unable to stand on his own. No trace of him was found. At the hospital, Jaron was admitted with a concussion, lacerations, and rib contusions. His wife, Michelle Walker, 36, who worked as a teacher's aide at a local elementary school, arrived with the children. Doctors explained that Jaron would remain under observation. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally speaking incoherently. At one point, while Michelle was at his bedside, he mumbled the words, Kevin Thompson, forgive me, son." The phrase was distinct enough that the nurse wrote it down in the chart as part of orientation checks. Michelle was unsettled. She knew the name Kevin Thompson from her son Marcus's school. Kevin was a student in the 10th grade and sometimes volunteered with the baseball program. Marcus had mentioned him briefly. Jaron had never spoken of the boy and in fact usually avoided conversation about their children's school friends. Michelle could not understand why her injured husband would call that name, or why he would attach the word son to it. Later, when Jaron slept, Michelle stepped into the waiting area and searched the name on her phone. A recent police bulletin appeared. It was a missing juvenile notice for a 16-year-old named Kevin A. Thompson, last seen in Dayton 2 days earlier. The bulletin included his date of birth, March 12, 2008. Michelle stared at the number. It was 9 months after the summer of 2007, a period when she and Jaron had separated before reconciling later that year. She scrolled to the attached photograph and compared it with the face she had glimpsed briefly in the alley when she first approached the scene. The resemblance seemed clear. The teenager who had been beaten by the officers was the same Kevin Thompson listed as missing. Monday morning in Dayton, Ohio. Michelle Walker arrived at the hospital carrying a printed copy of the missing juvenile notice she had found the night before. She entered her husband's room quickly, ignoring the nurse who tried to stop her from disturbing him. Jaron Walker was half sitting in bed, pale, still under medication for pain and concussion. Michelle held up the paper and demanded in a raised voice an explanation. "Who is Kevin Thompson and why do you call him son?" Jaron reacted immediately. Under the influence of morphine, his resistance collapsed. Tears appeared, and he admitted in broken sentences that Kevin was his biological child. He explained that in the summer of 2007, when he and Michelle were separated, he dated a waitress named Angela Wright, who was 21 at the time. The relationship lasted several weeks. When Michelle returned and suggested marriage, Geron chose to reconcile with her and continue pursuing the stable life they had planned, including her career in education and his steady employment. He did not tell Michelle about Angela. Months later, Angela gave birth to a boy, Kevin. Geron did not attend the birth. According to Geron's account, he provided financial support through state child services after a caseworker contacted him, but he never met the child in person. For 16 years, he sent small monthly payments, documented as child support, but avoided personal involvement. He justified the decision by telling himself it was better for Michelle not to know, and better for the child not to experience divided loyalties. He stated that he had lived with guilt, but lacked courage to acknowledge Kevin openly. Later that morning, Michelle retrieved Geron's belongings. The phone that witnesses said Bradley had taken was returned to the hospital through the evidence channel. It had several cracks on the case, but powered on. While Geron dozed, Michelle accessed his messages. In the inbox, she saw recent communication from a contact saved as KT. The first message was direct. "Hi, this is your son." The next explained that Kevin's mother, Angela, had died from an overdose earlier in the year, and that Kevin had been placed in foster care with the Thompsons. Several messages described fear of being moved to another location. Kevin pleaded for help. "Please answer. I need help." The last message, dated the day before the beating, read, "If you don't meet with me, I'll tell your wife everything." Michelle scrolled through the history and saw that Geron had not responded once. She placed the phone on the bed beside him and asked if he had read the messages. He nodded faintly, tears visible again, and admitted he had seen them, but decided not to answer. He said he believed replying would destroy his marriage and family. Michelle walked away from the bed and sat in a chair without speaking. Around noon, the door opened, and a teenager entered slowly on crutches. His head was bandaged. It was Kevin Thompson. His appearance left no doubt. His eyes, jawline, and the small dimple on his chin were nearly identical to Geron's at a younger age. The boy leaned on the crutches, approached the bed, and spoke quietly. "Hi, Dad. My name is Kevin. I'm 16 years old. Now we both know what a police baton tastes like." Michelle began to cry when she saw him. The resemblance to Marcus, their eldest, was undeniable. She looked from the boy to her husband, then back again. Kevin remained calm, though his voice carried restrained anger. He continued, saying he had not come to ask for money or apologies. He said the Thompsons, his foster parents, were preparing to leave town at the end of the week, and that he knew why. Kevin reached into his pocket and produced a damaged phone with a broken screen. He tapped until a video opened. The footage, though shaky, showed Officer Daniel Bradley receiving an envelope from a middle-aged woman. The woman's face was visible. Susan Thompson, Kevin's foster mother. On the recording, she handed the envelope and said, "Make sure this boy disappears by Monday. Then you'll get the rest." Kevin explained that he had been filming from behind a doorway. Kevin explained further that he had been recording since the incident in the alley, and that he had observed suspicious activity during his 2 years with the Thompsons. He said what he discovered went beyond ordinary misconduct and was far more dangerous. Robert and Susan Thompson, a middle-aged couple living in Dayton, had taken 4 foster children over the years. Officially, they did so to provide care and to receive state benefits. In reality, Kevin explained, the Thompsons were under severe financial strain. Their biological daughter, Emily, aged 11, had been diagnosed with leukemia. Treatment costs, medications, and travel to Cincinnati for specialized procedures left the family facing debts they could not manage. Kevin said that after a year, the Thompsons decided that state subsidies were insufficient and began to look for other ways to obtain money. Kevin stated that Robert and Susan used connections to a local middleman who paired childless couples with foster children. The arrangement was presented to outsiders as relocation to distant relatives in other states or even abroad. In fact, the children were transferred illegally in exchange for large payments. Over 2 years, 2 foster children in their care disappeared under this system. Kevin remembered their names and approximate ages. He said one had been sent to Canada, another to Australia. He never saw them again. According to him, the children were told they were going to live with relatives, but the documents he once glimpsed showed buyer information. Kevin was meant to be the third. He became suspicious when he discovered that paperwork with his name was being prepared, listing unfamiliar names in Ontario as guardians. He secretly photographed some of the pages with an old phone but could not retrieve all of them. When he confronted Susan about the documents, she dismissed his questions and told him never to ask again. Susan Thompson worked as a secretary at the local police station. Through her position, she knew Officer Daniel Bradley. Kevin said Bradley frequently visited the house, always meeting in private with Susan in the living room or garage. Later, Kevin understood why. Bradley was under pressure due to alimony debts. He faced arrears and risked losing his job. Susan offered him cash payments for assistance when difficult situations arose. When Kevin located Jaron online and began sending messages demanding a meeting, Susan grew alarmed. She told Kevin that discussing his biological father could ruin everything. When Kevin persisted, the Thompsons turned to Bradley. Kevin said he overheard Susan on the phone saying, "If the boy starts talking, we all go down." Kevin realized the danger but continued trying to reach Jaron. He sent several messages over weeks and received no reply. After Angela Wright, his mother, died from an overdose, Kevin said his sense of urgency increased. He wrote to Jaron, "I need help. Please answer." Jaron never did. The last message Kevin sent was a warning that if his father ignored him, he would tell Michelle the truth. The next day, he was beaten in the alley. While Kevin told this story, Michelle's phone rang. It was Detective Rachel Hunt, the officer assigned to Jaron's case. Hunt's tone was serious. She explained that the Thompsons had filed an official complaint. They alleged that Jaron had attempted to blackmail them, demanding money in exchange for silence about family issues. They had even presented a written statement from a witness, Kevin himself. Hunt said she had been instructed to close the case on the officer's use of force by Wednesday. Michelle was shocked and said that was impossible. Hunt replied, "They have paperwork, they have a witness statement, and I am under orders. Unless something changes, the complaint against your husband will stand after the call." Michelle confronted Kevin, asking what the detective meant. Kevin lowered his head and whispered. He admitted that Susan and Robert forced him to sign a statement accusing his biological father of threats and demands for money. They told him if he refused, he would be shipped out to Canada the next morning. They used his fear to coerce him. Kevin told Michelle, "I didn't want to sign, but they said it was the only way. I thought I had no choice." Meanwhile, at the Thompson household, Susan accessed hospital records through her clerical login. She saw that Kevin had been discharged into Jaron's custody. She panicked. She called Bradley and, according to later transcripts, shouted into the phone, "They're together. The boy is telling everything. We need to eliminate both tonight, or by morning we'll all be in prison and my daughter will die without treatment." Bradley resisted, reminding her that assault was one matter, but murder was another. Susan pressed harder, reminding him of his debts. "Your ex-wife already filed papers. You'll be arrested Friday. Help us disappear. You'll get enough money to start a new life." Bradley did not give an immediate answer. Back at the hospital, the Walker children waited in a side corridor. 13-year-old Marcus, restless and anxious, overheard fragments of the conversation through the door. He learned that Kevin was his half-brother, that his father had hidden the truth for 16 years, and that their family could fall apart. He also heard that police officers and foster parents were planning to make Kevin disappear permanently. The information struck him hard. At 13, Marcus wanted to prove he could act. He decided he had to protect his family's honor himself. While his parents were distracted, Marcus slipped out of the hospital. He took a city bus home, entered the house quietly, and retrieved his aluminum baseball bat from his room. Then he returned to the hospital area, locating a vending machine near the lobby. There he found Kevin, who was struggling with his crutches. Marcus walked up and introduced himself directly. "Hi, I'm Marcus, your younger brother. Let's punish those who hurt our dad together." Kevin looked at him, surprised, but also moved. Marcus gripped the bat tightly, showing determination. Kevin nodded and said they had little time. He explained the Thompsons' weekly routine. Every Tuesday, Susan took Emily to chemotherapy in Cincinnati, leaving Robert alone in the house until evening. That gave them a 3-hour window to find documents proving the scheme. Kevin said that if they secured the documents and delivered them to the police, the operation could be exposed. The two brothers began walking through the evening park toward the Thompsons' neighborhood. Kevin leaned on his crutches. Marcus carried the bat over his shoulder. Marcus asked with teenage bravado, "What if they resist?" Kevin's reply was grim. "Then you'll understand why I asked you to bring the bat." Kevin Thompson and Marcus Walker approached the Thompsons' house through a neighbor's yard shortly after sunset. Kevin leaned heavily on his crutches. Marcus carried his aluminum baseball bat. Their plan was to use the hours when Susan was away with her daughter Emily for chemotherapy. Kevin explained that Robert would usually be alone until the evening. However, as they reached the edge of the property, they noticed a black car with government plates parked in the driveway. Kevin recognized the vehicle. It belonged to Officer Daniel Bradley. He told Robert Thompson that the boy needed to be eliminated immediately, staged as an accident, so that Jaron Walker could be accused of attacking a police officer. Bradley explained that if Jaron were discredited, all testimony from Kevin would collapse. Robert objected, saying he was not a killer, and that the only reason they had engaged in wrongdoing was to pay for Emily's treatment. "The healthcare system bankrupts ordinary families," Robert said. Bradley's reply was cold. "Too late for morality. Either they disappear forever, or we all go to prison." At the same time, Jaron Walker had discharged himself from the hospital against medical advice. He still had 3 broken ribs and a concussion, but when Michelle called in panic to say Marcus was missing, he acted immediately. A security guard had reported seeing Marcus leave with a teenager on crutches. Jaron realized instantly what had happened. The boys had gone after the Thompsons themselves. He rented a vehicle and drove across the city, arriving in the neighborhood just as Bradley exited the front door with his service pistol in hand, heading toward the bushes where the 2 teenagers were hiding. Jaron leapt from the car and shouted across the yard, "Hey, Bradley! Do you remember me? That inconvenient witness." He threw himself at the officer before Bradley could reach the boys. What followed was a violent struggle. Despite his injuries, Jaron fought with the desperation of a father protecting his children. Bradley tried to raise his pistol, but Marcus swung the aluminum bat at his arm, knocking the weapon away. Kevin, abandoning his crutches, joined in, striking with his fists despite his weakened state. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes, but left clear evidence. Neighbors heard the shouting and the sounds of metal striking bone. Several called emergency services. Jaron finally gained control of the bat and struck Bradley's arm and ribs, breaking both. At that moment, he saw the fear in his son's eyes. He stopped short of further violence, refusing to cross the line into killing. When officers arrived in response to the neighbors' calls, Detective Rachel Hunt was first on the scene. She immediately placed Bradley under arrest for attempted murder of minors. Jaron, though hailed as a protector by his children, was also taken into custody for excessive use of force. Inside the Thompson residence, police executed a rapid search. In a locked safe, they found documents confirming Kevin's story, contracts for the transfer of 2 foster children to families in Canada and Australia, photographs of the missing children, and records of payments routed through a middleman. Buyer information and bank details were included. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Robert and Susan Thompson broke down. They confessed to the scheme, explaining that they had acted in desperation to secure money for Emily's treatment. Robert stated through tears, "We are not monsters. We just wanted to save Emily. When the healthcare system forces a choice between your child's life and the law, parents will choose the child." 4 months later, the court issued sentences. Jaron received 2 years of probation, classified under self-defense while protecting minors. His lawyer successfully argued that without Jaron's intervention, 2 children would have been harmed by an armed officer. Bradley was sentenced to 6 years for corruption, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Robert and Susan Thompson each received 8 years for human trafficking. Their daughter Emily was placed under the care of a charity program that funded treatment for children of convicted parents. The Walkers faced their own reckoning. Michelle did not file for divorce, but she insisted on family therapy. She told Jaron in court, I cannot forgive 16 years of lies in one day. But you saved children and showed our sons what real courage is. Jaron returned to work at the warehouse after his recovery. His management, acknowledging his role in exposing the network, promoted him to shift supervisor. The consequences of the case extended beyond Dayton. Using the documents seized from the Thompsons, investigators traced 2 missing children abroad. One, 8-year-old Daniel, was found living in Toronto. The other, 10-year-old Christopher, was located in Sydney. Both were returned to the United States and placed with verified foster families. Detective Hunt received an FBI commendation for helping to uncover an international trafficking operation. 6 months later, the Walker family continued rebuilding. Jaron worked long hours but reserved weekends for his children. He saw Kevin every week, helping him prepare college applications in the field of social work. Marcus, now 14, spoke openly about his father in school, telling classmates, "My dad saved children and put bad cops in jail." And I also have a hero older brother. Michelle gradually forgave Jaron, attending weekly counseling with him. In one session he said, "I almost lost my family due to cowardice and lies, but I found the son I abandoned 16 years ago. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but 2 children are alive and home because we didn't stay silent. Sometimes you must risk everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves."